to the Football Hipsters podcast. My name is Kris. As you will be aware, I am your host, and it's time for another interview. We haven't done one for a little while, so whilst the summer is quiet, we haven't got any football until the Euro start, of course. I thought we'd get in a couple of guests and have a chat. So today, it's a great pleasure to introduce a gentleman from Scotland, but in Qatar. Work that one out. It's Ali Begg. Good afternoon to you, Ali.
Hi, Kris. How you doing?
I am well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
We shall start obviously by letting our listeners know a little bit about you and what it is you do. So fire away.
Well, I am currently employed by beIN Sports here in Qatar as a senior football producer. So I currently work on our Global Champions League coverage. I also produce a program on a Sunday night, which wraps up our Premier League coverage. It's called Sunday Night Live. And we have a late live game from either Italy, Spain, or France. And in the build-up to the game, we show every single goal from every major league around the world. And it's proved to be a hugely popular show, especially with the locals in the Middle East and North Africa. And I produced the FA Cup final this past Saturday, and I've done the Europa League final for them. And we're just in the middle of prepping for the Euros tournament because we're showing that live and exclusive here and in Australia as well. So, yeah, that's what I'm currently doing at the moment. Very busy. Got a Champions League preview show to do tomorrow night, which I'm thoroughly looking forward to. So, yeah, it's never a dull moment.
No, absolutely busy bee. And of course, you have a book out, which we will certainly touch on a little bit later in the show. So tell us a bit about being a football producer. I mean, obviously, a lot of people who sort of follow football go, oh, yeah, he's a producer. They all nod along thinking they know what that means, but often people don't really know what that entails. So what does your day-to-day life as a producer involve?
Well, my main role is basically to put the structure of a program together. So with my role here, I produce studio programs in and around the live matches. So we have shows which can have a 30-minute build-up, a 15-minute build-up, an hour's build-up, or a 2-hour build-up. So it's my role to structure the program from when we come on air to when we go off air, and to put the topics of discussion together, to put the rundown together, to liaise closely with the show's presenters so they know exactly what we're doing, speak to the guests if we do any sort of analytical stuff during the show. So that's basically what I do. I just put the structure of the program together, and then when it actually comes to the live event, I produce the program out of what we call the gallery. So I make the calls how the program goes. Obviously, I have a lot of discussions with the presenters. And yeah, that's basically what we do.
Interesting stuff. And I would imagine you get to, or have got to meet various different characters of all shapes and sizes.
Sure.
We'll certainly touch on that a little bit later on as well. So as a born and bred Scotsman, how on earth did you find your way to Qatar?
Yeah, it's a good call. Well, I was presenting for a number of years. So I'm sure if people have already read my book, I've had quite a colourful life so far. I've been extremely fortunate to have had a varied career. And in my mid-20s, I found myself presenting. And it's what I always fancied doing. And I was very fortunate to be picked up by Granada Satellite back in the late 90s. And from there, I was able to proceed to Manchester United's own in-house television station, which is MUTV. And from there, I just built a 15-year presenting career, which took me up to Glasgow to present for Celtic TV. And then it took me over to Singapore to present for ESPN Star Sports. And in between, I've done some shifts with Sky Sports News. I worked on a holiday network called Thomas Cook TV. So, yeah, I had a varied presenting career. But while I was in Singapore, I decided to take a step away from presenting. I was left in a very strange situation where the MD of our company at the time decided he didn't like my Scottish accent, and he took me off air and basically didn't renew my contract. But the guy who was my immediate line manager and head of production offered me an opportunity to step into production. And I believed at the time, even as painful as it was, I was kind of left a little bit with that feeling of being stuck in a crossroads and not really knowing where to go. But after careful consideration and talking to my wife about it, I decided I would move into production. And it was a really difficult decision at the time because obviously when you're presenting, you gain a certain following, you gain momentum doing it. People get to recognize you. You get a lot of say about things, and you're almost the focal point of the program. My role was always in my head was to load the gun for my guests to fire it, and I always really enjoyed that element of TV presenting, to pick the brains of the guys who had been there and had done it, basically. So when I stepped into production, I just felt at the time, this is where I can build longevity for myself. I can build a proper career for myself. I can bring security to my family, and I can bring security to myself. And hence why I took the difficult decision to step away from presenting and move into production. And it's the best thing I've ever done. To be honest with you, Kris, I wish I'd done it years before, because I thoroughly enjoy what I do. I enjoy producing more than I present. And people have asked me to step back into presentation, but I would never do it. I would never go back. And even now, here we make videos and in-house videos, and we've been asked to give comments about certain topics on air, and I shy away from it. I just don't ever want to be on camera again. It's just not me anymore. So, yeah, I'm extremely fortunate. I absolutely love my job.
It's amazing, isn't it? Sometimes when you just kind of fall into something that you never would have expected to have done, and then all of a sudden it becomes your sort of your bread and butter and your love. So I'm totally with you on that one. Now,
Yeah. It's. I never ever thought I would move into something like production. I always thought I would stay in presenting, but I think I found it easier than some of my contemporaries, because a lot of my contemporaries go into it, and I mean this with the greatest respect to some of the people that I've worked with, especially in Singapore. They only did it because they wanted to be famous. They enjoyed the celebrity side of it, and I was never into that. For me, it was just a job. So to make that change from presenting into production, I actually found really easy, because I really couldn't give a damn about whether people recognized me on the street or not. So it was actually quite an easy transition.
yeah, it's always a bonus. But some people might remember you for something different, which I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. so, so before your but I say before your love of football, I'm sure you love football from a young age, but before your work in football,
Mm.
why don't you tell us a bit about something that you did back in the 90s?
Do you know, I can never escape this, as much as sometimes I want to. I was a member of a boy band called Bad Boys Inc. in the early to middle 1990s.
Beautiful, I love it,
Yeah.
and for those who don't remember, because I do, as I said, I was having a look up with John, my producer, before we recorded, and I do remember, weirdly, I do remember the pictures. But how did you find that? I mean, was it sort of all the glitz and glamour that you expect as a youngster?
No, no, not at all. It's quite interesting. I was only having this discussion with some friends of ours recently, because it's only been since I've been with my wife that I've actually been able to openly talk about it. If you had, if we had done this podcast, say 5 years ago, I would have said to you, I'm not talking about Bad Boys Inc. I don't want anything to do with it. It took me a very, very long time to get over that whole experience. I can now look back on it with a great deal of fondness. I've got over myself over it, first and foremost. That was the biggest aspect for me, was I was able to now look back and think to myself, do you know what? There are millions and millions of people out there who are far more talented than I am, who work so hard every single day to become a professional musician, to break the music industry, to become famous, and to sell records. And I was given an opportunity, and somehow my face just fitted into this idea that this producer had of putting a boy band together in the early 90s. And before I knew it, I was a fully paid member of the Pop Star Club. And I now look back on it with a great deal of fondness, a hint of pride at what we achieved, and just sometimes I have to pinch myself that I had the most incredible 4 years, where I experienced, things that people can only dream of. So now I'm extremely grateful that I was given the opportunity to do it. But as I said, 5 years ago, I would have dismissed it out of hand. Absolutely.
Yeah, God, it is really interesting because obviously when you get to interview people, you find out all sorts of different bits and bobs. And we had a chat with Mina Rizuki a little while ago, and some of
Mm,
the stories she said about how that she sort of had dinner with people like Luca Vialli, and it just
mm,
rolled off the tongue like it was nothing to her. And
mm.
we were just sat there in awe. And it's always the same for us, interviewing somebody who's done so many different things.
Yeah,
It's fascinating to
yeah.
build people's.
It, it's amazing actually because people always say to me, "Did you meet really famous people?" And I'm like, "Yes, of course." Oh, what was it like? It must have been amazing. It must have been incredible. Do you know what? It wasn't because I didn't care. I didn't care that I met other pop stars, and I didn't care that I met the odd film star here or there. I got really excited was when I met professional football players. So when I was given the opportunity to go to Pittodrie and meet Willie Miller, who was my all-time hero, and do a photo shoot with Willie Miller for one of the Scottish newspapers just before our first single was released, it's as happy as I've ever been. I was as giddy as a kipper. And even now, when I meet some of the guys that come through now, I still have to pinch myself that I'm in a position where I can sit down and I can converse with these guys and I can have a conversation with them. And they find it fascinating that I used to be in a boy band, and they're fascinated about my story as much as I'm fascinated about their story. So we've been able to find common ground, and I find it really quite humbling that I can sit in the company of these guys and just have a normal conversation about it. It's brilliant. I love it.
Good, good. It's good to hear, and as you say, I'm exactly the same. Footballers is always my thing.
Mm,
Meeting your heroes is nothing better
mm,
than that, is there?
yeah, and it's
Uh,
also important. I've got to remember that, and I should always remind myself that if it wasn't for Bad Boys Inc., I wouldn't be sat here talking to you now because it gave me the platform to move into a sports broadcasting career. It gave me the platform to understand television, and it gave me some sort of profile. Before again, I dismissed it. I didn't think that Bad Boys Inc. had anything to do with where I am today. It had everything to do with where I am today, and now I can recognise that, which puts me in a position to actually fully appreciate how lucky I was.
yeah, absolutely. One career leads to another often, doesn't it? It's
Sure,
very,
sure,
very true.
sure.
So you growing up then, sort of as a young lad,
Mm,
sort of growing up in Scotland. So you have a love for Aberdeen, and
mm.
how did that sort of come about? Because you played at a sort of a semi-pro level as well, didn't you, as a
Yeah,
youngster?
yeah,
So
yeah.
did the sort of two go hand in hand?
No, not really, because I actually grew up in Holland. So when I first started school, my family, my mother and father, moved us to Holland because my father worked in the aviation industry for many, many years. So he worked out of Maastricht Airport as a commercial manager for a small airline, and he moved us over there. And it was only 1979 that we actually moved to Aberdeen, and we moved to a small fishing hamlet just 13 miles north of Aberdeen called Newborough. And that's where I actually grew up. And I was aware of football at the time. I can quite clearly remember the 1978 World Cup, and when Scotland were playing Holland, I think it was, and Archie Gemmill scored that incredible goal. And I'll never forget seeing my father's reaction to that goal. And I didn't really understand football at that age. I was still quite young at that age and didn't really understand it. But through that evening and watching my father just going nuts when Archie Gemmill scored that goal, because my father, he was, before he died, he was just such a placid, easygoing guy. But that day, he was punching the air through and he was screaming at the top of his voice. And I loved it. I remember I was sat on my mother's knee watching the game with her, not really understanding what this I was actually watching. And that's where my love of football began. And when we moved to Aberdeen, we would sit down at breakfast before going to school, and Dad would wax lyrical about this football team that had just won the Scottish Premier Division. And then you'd watch it on television on the highlights, and then all of a sudden Aberdeen just became part of my life, and it became part of our folklore. That's where the love affair began, really, back in 1979.
Seems so long ago, doesn't it?
God almighty, yeah.
And with Aberdeen, can you remember? It's always a fascinating question because usually people can ping this one. Your first game, can you remember where that
Yeah,
was?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was the last game of the season 1980-81. We played Kilmarnock at Pittodrie and we got beat 2-0. So my first Aberdeen game, we got beat 2-0. But my first ever football match was Scotland v England at Hampden Park in 1980 when England beat Scotland 2-0. So my first 2 games, both of my teams got beat.
Gutted.
Devastated.
Gutted. And obviously in the 80s, sort of, well, I say 80s and some of the 90s, Aberdeen were the sort of powerhouse for a time, and
Yeah.
some of our younger listeners won't know, of course, but Sir Alex Ferguson was kind of cutting his teeth up there in Scotland before he arrived at Manchester United. How was it, and how does it compare to nowadays, where we've just seen Rangers come back to the Premiership for next season, but it's been very much... Yeah, very true. It's been very much a Celtic dominated league for a number of years. So how does it feel being like almost the third team of Scotland, but were the biggest team really in that era?
Yeah, it's been a very painful, 25, 26 years. And this past season, because of what Aberdeen under Derek McInnes were achieving, it's the first time since, I would say, 1990-91, when we came so close to winning the league, that I've had the same emotions and feelings as I did back then about my team winning the league. And they gave me hope. They actually gave me hope this year. And a lot, I have a lot of banter on Twitter with the Celtic fans that follow me, who keep saying to me, it's false hope. What you have is a false hope. And there's nothing wrong for me, as a guy who's now 43 years old, who has not had these type of emotions for nearly 30 years, to relive them and to relive my youth when Aberdeen were dominating Scottish football, and you could argue possibly European football for a couple of years, because it was just an incredible ride. And I'm extremely blessed to have lived my life growing up as an Aberdeen fan, because I grew up when Aberdeen were number one, when we were winning everything. We went to Scottish Cup finals year after year. We went to the European Cup Winners' Cup final. We went to the Super Cup final. We never missed a game. And I was extremely fortunate to have grown up in that period. So this past season, when they gave me that hope again, it just catapulted me back to my youth. And I was just loving every minute of it. Obviously, it was really sad the way it ended. It was a bit of a damp squib towards the end of the season. But what Derek McInnes is doing at Pittodrie is just phenomenal. And he deserves every praise that comes his way. And we're already building for next season. And I don't care that Rangers are back in the league. For me, it's a good thing. They've served their time. They've come back up through the leagues. They're back into the SPFL. And bring it on, as far as I'm concerned. I take more pleasure at beating Rangers than anything on this planet. So when we play them, and if we soundly beat them, you will not find a happier man on this planet. So I welcome them back to the SPFL. And obviously it'll lift the league. It will, people will say they've not been missed. I personally don't think they've been missed. They haven't been missed. The stats tell you that they haven't been missed. But I welcome them back, and it'll be good for us. And I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fantastic.
I think a lot of Hibs fans will share your thoughts on Rangers right now after the weekend's events.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of people will forget. Of course, Aberdeen had a successful Cup Winners' Cup run in the 80s, 82. In fact, the year of my birth, 83, I was born.
83, so, yeah.
Yes, people forget that.
Yeah.
Current squad then. Any obviously being a hipsters podcast, we've got to get some names from you as to who you think could be either a current sort of a current quality player or someone coming through the youth ranks, maybe.
We've got, at the moment, some really decent lads coming through the youth ranks, and that for me, a huge amount of credit should go to Neil Simpson, who of course was part of Sir Alex's team that won the Cup Winners' Cup, and he's been running the academy now for a number of years, and we continually churn out players who break into Aberdeen's first team. Now, you could argue that some of them haven't cemented their place, but they've moved on to other clubs. Now, surely that's what it's all about. We've been extremely fortunate that some have come in, they've done really, really well, and they've left for transfer fees, and they've gone down south. Some of them, I think, a little bit premature. I think they should have stayed and learned their trade a little bit more, and then made the move. I understand the financial implications of that, blah, blah. But sometimes I think when you're a youngster, you need to finish your trade first. Keep learning. You're always learning when you're a kid. And then you can start looking at, trying to make yourselves financially a little bit more secure. But we've got some great kids coming through. At the moment, I would say that Niall McGinn, Johnny Hayes, Adam Rooney, Graham Shinney, are head and shoulders at the moment. You could argue that these guys belong in the SPFL Team of the Year. They've just been absolutely phenomenal. It was a real shame when Danny Ward, who's the current one of the Liverpool goalkeepers, the understudy, and he came up for the first 6 months, and that's when Aberdeen were doing really, really well. Went on that long undefeated run and broke club records, but unfortunately Liverpool asked for him back, and our season kind of tailored off a little bit after that. So we need to find a solid goalkeeper, and I mean that with the greatest respect to the guys that we've got there at the moment, but we need a new goalkeeper. We need a new centre-back, I believe, as well. So, listen, the foundation is there. For me, the foundation is there. We've got a strong core squad. Kenny McLean has come in. He's really now starting to find his feet. He's had a good season under his belt now, so he got his first Scotland call-up as well, so he's done really well. Listen, I'm extremely happy. In fact, I'm extremely encouraged. It's, the way that we've finished the seasons with Derek McInnes. For me, it's been progress, slow but steady progress, and that's what Derek McInnes wanted to do when he first came in, is just progress year on, year on. And he's doing that. And I know this season finished sort of slightly disappointing with 4 defeats out of 5 in the playoffs. But just kick on. We brought a couple of players in already this season, this summer, I should say, and I hope we bring in a couple more, a solid centre-back, possibly one midfielder, and I think we'll be okay. And I really hope we can challenge again.
Absolutely, yeah. So some of the things you were saying there, as an Arsenal fan, I can totally understand the things. We just need this one extra player. Although we're terrible every summer, we go through the same thing. Less said, the better. Yeah. You touched obviously on Willie Miller being your hero, and obviously you wrote a piece, a chapter, I believe, in his book, Aberdeen's Dream Team. But you yourself are an author. I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your book. It's called Begg to Differ. Lovely play on your son in there, like it.
You see what I did there?
I did, clever, like it. Basically, obviously, sort of about your life as an Aberdeen fan, and indeed your boy band sort of days, and indeed your broadcasting career. So, how has the book gone? Give people a bit of an insight into how it sort of came about, how long it took to write, and how it's progressing, sort of interest-wise from people.
Okay, well, the idea came in 2003. I broke my leg really badly in just an innocuous accident. And unfortunately, due to the nature of the break, I spent 2 months in hospital and then 4 months at home with what you call a Lizaroff cage, which is one of these metal contraptions that basically hold your leg together. So I had a lot of metal work holding my leg together, which meant I was unable to work. I couldn't do any sort of physical activity, and I was told I had to rest. So the only thing that kept me going was I needed a project. And I just finished reading Nick Hornby's Fever Pitch. And I really related to what Nick had done. And I thought to myself, I think I'm going to try this, but I think I'm going to put my own spin to it, because I think I had a bit of a story to tell with what happened to me in the boy band, and then how my career had kind of progressed after the boy band and how I was able to sort of reinvent myself. Because at the time I was working for Manchester United TV, so I had been in a very privileged position to be in the company of players and in the company of Sir Alex. And I just decided, let's give it a go. It actually took me 10 years to write it, because I would have a go at it and then I would put it away for a long time, and I'd bring it back out and I would write it and then I'd put it away again. But then obviously as my career progressed and the move from Singapore to Qatar, I thought, right, there's another chapter there. What happened to me in Singapore when I lost my presenting job there? I thought, okay, that's something else I can write about. Obviously with Aberdeen Football Club, then progressing as well. With them winning the League Cup, I thought that's the perfect way to start the book, because it's the first time we'd won a trophy in, so many years. So I decided to just try and write my story. So I did my best not to make it autobiographical, because who the hell am I to do such a thing? That would have just been incredibly arrogant of me to do that. So I tried not to make it read like an autobiography. So I always tried to keep the Aberdeen Football Club theme going throughout the book. So all my stories are written with Aberdeen Football Club well and truly within the theme of the book. And we finished it a couple of years ago, and incredibly, a publisher picked it up, and she loved it, and she wanted me to publish it, and I self-published in the end, which I was happy to do. And incredibly, it got to #1 on 3 different sports platforms on Amazon, and we sold the first print run, and it's done really, really well on Kindle. I actually, I decided after talking to my wife about it that I would the proceeds from the book, the profits that I made after my costs, I decided to donate them because I just wanted to give something back. There's a guy in Aberdeen who arranges all the displays at Pataudry. His name's Stephen. I don't want to give away his surname, but I wanted to help and I wanted to give something back. So I got in touch with Stephen and I said to him, look, would you accept a donation from me so that I can fund some of the displays that you do, because position to help. And he was absolutely thrilled. So I donated the profits of my book to Stephen, and there's been a couple of displays since which have been absolutely fantastic. And yeah, it gives me great pleasure in being able to do that. So and I'm hoping that the book will still keep selling, because whatever proceeds I can make from the book, I want to keep donating them to Stephen and maybe some other charities, especially one, the Heart Foundation, because my father died of a heart attack, and they do an amazing job, and I want to contribute some money to them, let's say. So I'm hoping that the book keeps going and we keep promoting it, and that's why I'm grateful to you guys for letting me on the podcast and telling people about my book. So thank you for letting me do that.
Oh, pleasure, absolutely. And of course, we will tweet the links of where you can pick up the book.
Thank
you.
A
few bits and bobs on it as well.
Tremendous.
No worries, and very good of you as well. I mean, I have to say, like, a lot of people, that they'll do things and they'll have the best intentions, but never follow them through. So to give away that amount is fantastic. So good on you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's sort of talk a little bit about your love for the game as a whole. Then, so obviously we've clarified that you love your Scottish football. What other leagues? I understand you follow a bit of Austrian football. We'll start there, because one of our members, Tom, is a big Red Bull Salzburg fan. And I think I'm right, so you married your wife in Salzburg, is that right?
Yeah. So my wife is Austrian. So my wife and I met in Singapore, and we got married in Salzburg in 2011, and we had sort of 2 ceremonies, because you got to go through a civil service, which we did. So we got married at the top of a mountain called the Untersberg, which, if you ever watch The Sound of Music, it's the mountain that's always in the background. So Miriam grew up in a small town called Grudig, which is the area where she grew up, which is a suburb of Salzburg. And she literally grew up in an apartment at the bottom of this mountain, which just dominates your panoramic view whenever you go and sit on the balcony. So we had our civil service at the top of the mountain, and then we actually had a full church service for all our family and friends in St. Peter's Church in the square in Salzburg. And I know it's no cliche, and I'm not trying to sound cheesy, and forgive me, but honestly, it was the best day of my life. It was just the greatest. And through her family and the brother, and you can't help but start to get intrigued about the Austrian Bundesliga. And I'd been following Red Bull Salzburg anyway, but then I discovered that Grudig themselves, who are just a small provincial town with a population of about, I don't know, less than 10,000 people, probably about 5,000 people. And I always, on the way to the airport, just off the Autobahn, is a small football club. I always used to think, that's a really nice little football club for an amateur club. I just thought it was like a Sunday morning team or a Saturday afternoon semi-professional team. And I got talking to Miriam's dad about it, and he told me that this team called Grudig had basically done what a Wimbledon had done many, many years ago. They'd come up through all the regional leagues, and then they found themselves in the Bundesliga. So they'd come up through the regional leagues, and then the 3rd division, the 2nd division, the 1st division, and they got promoted to the top flight. Now, their average attendance was less than 1,500 fans, and they had one little stand, and the rest of the stadium was totally open to the elements with the most incredible views of the Untersberg mountain range, hence the name, the Untersberg Arena. And then, incredibly, they got into the Europa League after their first season. Just unbelievable. And we used to go, and I got to meet the general manager, got to meet their gaffer at the time, a guy called Adi Hutter. And it was just fascinating. And I became fascinated by this little club. And they just did incredibly well. And I started following them. And whenever Miriam and I went back to Austria, I would always pop in to say hi. And some friends of ours know the general manager really well, so he always gets the VIP tickets. And their VIP is a marquee. And I just love that because there's just no pretentiousness to it at all. They just did unbelievably well. And then obviously, because Adi Hutter had got them into the Europa League qualifiers, I think they finished second behind Red Bull Salzburg. Red Bull Salzburg's manager at the time, what's his name, who's now Bayer Leverkusen's manager, Schmidt, Roger Schmidt.
Yes.
He was the manager of Red Bull Salzburg. He's then got the call to go to Bayer Leverkusen, and Adi Hutter got the job at Red Bull Salzburg. So then I'm following Adi Hutter, and then Red Bull Salzburg have come over to Qatar to do their winter training. And he very kindly took us out for dinner, me and Miriam, because we also know that the press guys there very well. So we all went out for dinner, and it was just fabulous, that I could sit in the company of these chaps, and we didn't even talk football, and that was the nicest thing. And I think that's what Adi in particular appreciated, was that we were just able to talk about places where we'd been on holiday, about our kids, about me growing up. I spoke to him about my book, about following Aberdeen, because he'd been to Celtic Park and had played Celtic in the Europa League, and just what an amazing experience it was. But unfortunately, this past season, they got relegated. They finished bottom of the league, got relegated. And because of that, they've had to give up their professional status. So they've actually now come out of the Bundesliga and they've gone amateur again. And they're basically having to start from scratch. And it's a terrible shame. And I was really saddened when a friend of mine texted me the news. It's just really awful, because they've built themselves a nice new stadium off the back of the Europa League success and selling their best players on to like Austria Vienna and Rapid Vienna. And it's just a really terribly sad story. And I just wish them nothing but the best. And they're just a lovely, lovely football club, family run, no airs or graces, just delighted to be in the Bundesliga. And it's a terrible shame. But, whenever we go back to Salzburg, if Grudig are not playing at home, then Red Bull Salzburg are. So I went to watch Red Bull Salzburg in April when we were home, because we've got a home just over the border in Germany. We converted an old restaurant into a holiday let. So maybe when I go back, when after we can. And I took in Red Bull Salzburg against Mattersburg. And I just love it. I just love everything about it, because I've written about it in some of my columns that I write. The match day experience, we could learn so much from how the Germans and the Austrians treat their fans. And I genuinely believe that when Aberdeen move to their new stadium, they should give me a call and ask me about my experiences going to Grudig and Red Bull Salzburg, because we could learn a lot. We really could.
Yeah, you always say about the atmospheres, particularly as you say in Austria, Germany, that kind of part of Europe. So no, I'm with you on that one. And I
Yeah.
think it's safe to say that Tom will definitely be in touch with you, because I'm pretty sure he will talk to you for hours.
Great.
He's we have a thing on our podcast called it's called the Mighty 90, which is where we all have kind of our own little team that we follow.
Yeah.
And Tom follows Red Bull Salzburg, so
Good lad. Good lad.
he'll have plenty to say to you, I'm sure. So
Tremendous.
stay tuned for that one. And you follow a little bit of Bundesliga in Germany as well.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific team you follow?
Yeah, I followed Munich. I fell in love with Munich after the 1983 Cup Winners' Cup campaign, because Aberdeen obviously beat them and knocked them out. And the second leg at Pittodrie, I was fortunate enough to go to as a 10-year-old. And for me, it still is. It's historically the greatest night ever at Pittodrie. It was just the most amazing experience. And, I dedicated a lot of it, the Cup Winners' Cup campaign. There's a whole chapter of it in my book. It was just the most amazing night. And ever since then, I've just followed Bayern Munich. And I don't really know why. I just did. I think I just fell in love with them after the Cup Winners' Cup. And whenever we go back to Austria and Germany, we try our best to get up to Munich to take in a game. My wife, actually, the first year we were together, she surprised me with tickets for Munich against Dortmund, and we were up on the second tier, almost on the 18-yard line, and just I just can't begin to explain how fantastic it is. And anybody who's a football fan, you've got to try and take in a game in the Bundesliga, whether you go and sit with the fans in the Allianz Arena or you're in the famous Borussia Dortmund end where it's just nuts for 90 minutes. I just love German football. I've always been a big fan of German football, and we're extremely lucky here that we've had people like Didi Hamann come over. Uwe Rosler is coming over for the Euros. Paul Lambert was here for a while, and we did a full documentary on him about his time at Dortmund, winning the Champions League with Dortmund, and just loved talking to him about his time in Germany. So I just love it. I love the Bundesliga.
Good stuff. And that Paul Lambert and Dortmund, that always conjures up memories of that kit. I love that kit, that luminous one.
Yeah.
Got a thing for luminous kits, I swear. What's your? I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, Scott, what he thinks of some of the English teams, because it's always interesting to find out what people south of north of the border, sorry, think
Mm,
of the teams in the Premier League and down
mm,
this end. So, what's been your take? Obviously, we've just come off the back of a season where Leicester have done something quite incredible, really,
mm,
given
mm.
the scale of what they've achieved. And what's your views on English football and the games you cover? What's your sort of thoughts on the standard and some of the teams that impress you of the last season?
I think Leicester winning the league it's just incredible. It's fabulous. There's just no getting away from it. It's just fabulous. It's why we all love football. For me, it epitomizes everything about why I love football, because of what Leicester have just achieved. And I honestly, I hope it never goes away. I hope people are talking about it for years and years and years to come. And I hope Claudio Ranieri is able to keep that team together for at least one or two more seasons. I just don't want people to ever forget it. It's just been fantastic. It was so exciting. I don't work in the Premier League here. I worked on it the first year I was here. I love the Premier League. I've worked on it for many, many years. When I was in Singapore, I presented it for many years, and then produced it here for the first year. But the excitement around it's just the most incredible product, and you can never get away from it no matter where you go in the world. And I think we should be incredibly proud of it, not just for England, but for the UK as a whole. Um, you know, for me, I've always had an affinity for Manchester United purely because of the Sir Alex Ferguson relationship with Aberdeen. But I've also got a soft touch for Arsenal because I've got friends who work for the football club. I played charity football club for the Arsenal ex-pros and celebrity football team for many years while I was living in London, and became very friendly with a lot of the people behind the scenes. So I've got a very soft touch for Arsenal. But whenever there's a game on, I don't care who it is. It could be Leicester against Aston Villa. It could be Sunderland against Newcastle. It could be Chelsea against Tottenham. I'll sit down and I'll watch it because you're almost guaranteed to get a decent game. Um, it's just a fantastic product, and I can't speak highly enough of it. And what we do here it's just incredible. Working with Richard Keys and Andy Gray is just their knowledge of the game and the way they present the programs has made me completely look differently at how we produce programs, and they've helped me enhance my skills as a producer, and they've made me look at how we produce live football matches around the studio completely differently to how I used to how I used to produce programs, say in Singapore. So I owe a great deal to Andy and to Richard as well in the years that I've been working with them. And Angus Scott is here as well, and I work very closely with Angus. And if it's the one thing that I would, when I do eventually decide to move on, it's the one thing I will take from my time at beIN Sports is that my skills as a producer have been greatly enhanced for working with the most incredibly talented people. So I'm extremely fortunate from that point of view. So I love the Premier League. I just love it, and I won't have anyone say a bad word about it, as a Scotsman. So yeah, I love it. I love it.
Good stuff, good stuff. I should warn you as well in advance that because of mine and a couple of the crews association with an Arsenal podcast. We do have quite a big Arsenal following listenership. So
Right.
now you said people, you're going to get inundated with people going, "What do you know? Who do you know?" Guarantee it.
No problem.
Everybody's always interested in the inner workings of the clubs.
Sure.
What's your thoughts on? We'll talk about the Euros briefly. I mean,
Mm,
what's your
mm.
kind of thoughts on that upcoming? Because international football is people divide on it. I mean,
Yeah.
I must admit, I've never been a huge international football fan, but this Euros has the makings of quite an open tournament, quite a fun tournament. What are you most looking forward to, and who do you see as the potential sort of winners of the tournament as well?
Well, for me, because Scotland obviously didn't qualify, it was a huge disappointment. And because Scotland haven't qualified for so many years, I can't get overly excited as what I did when I was a young lad, when Scotland were always qualifying for major tournaments. So, I've got to find myself another team. So I would always follow England for a start, and then I'd follow Germany because of my love of the Bundesliga. But now, I've got Austria to look forward to. And because they did so incredibly well in their qualifying campaign, undefeated, just a phenomenal campaign. And the workings of the Football Association of Austria and what the government do to help them, and the sports ministry and the FA themselves, and how they've been able to create what is an incredibly successful model, which I think personally a lot of countries should look at and should follow because it's successful, very much like what Iceland have done as well. So I can't wait. I'm going to be working on it. I'm going to be producing all the live games on it. So I personally can't wait for the tournament to start. And I genuinely think that Austria could be dark horses here. I watched a couple of their friendly games back in April where they didn't really cover themselves in glory. But for me, I don't think you can take an awful lot from friendly games. For me, they're just bounce games. I kind of think they're meaningless, to be honest. For me, it's just it's an opportunity for the gaffer to play players that he might not pick, or to try a formation out, or whatever he wants to do. So they're kind of meaningless. So I don't really take a great deal from them. But I think they'll do well, I'm going to be watching them very, very closely. And I've already said to my boss, me produce the Austria games. I really want to produce them because obviously I've got a fairly decent knowledge and understanding of the players and the workings of the team. But I'll be following Germany for obvious reasons as well. So I can't wait. I love it. I absolutely, I worked in the World Cup a couple of years ago, and even though it was incredibly hard work, it was hugely rewarding. And it's like, yeah, I've just produced a World Cup semi-final. How many people can say that? And this year, I'm hoping that I might be able to go a step and maybe produce the final. Obviously, that's in the hands of the gods, and we'll see what will happen. But for me, it's incredibly exciting to be working on it, and then to come home and to be able to watch it after my day's work and after the games that I've produced. But the fact that Austria are there has just given me that incentive to get really up for it this year. So, yeah, I, for one, cannot wait.
Again, I can hear Tom sitting there just doing that little jig, going, "Yes, somebody else who follows Austria," because he's following them for us during the Euros. We're embarking on daily podcasts throughout the
Oh,
Euros, so
brilliant,
we're going to
brilliant.
be busy bees. But
Excellent.
speaking of, you mentioned the World Cup.
Mm,
There's obviously one is scheduled for Qatar
mm.
in the next coming couple of years. What's it? How's it gone down over there, sort of on the streets, talking to locals, talking to people you work with? Because obviously there's a huge amount of controversy about what's going on, whether it's going to happen, whether it was bought, etc.
Yeah,
What's your kind of views on that, and do you foresee it still happening?
absolutely. Absolutely. There is absolutely no reason why the World Cup will not happen in Qatar. With all the controversy, it's not for me to comment. It really isn't, and I would be uncomfortable commentating about it. Um, I can only tell you from what I see and my own personal opinion. The work that has been done here is phenomenal. The jobs that have been created here is incredible. The economic drive of countries where workers have come from has increased because of the work that's been offered to them. And it's just incredible. And they're very, very excited. They feel incredibly privileged. And they want to bring this World Cup to the people. And they want to show the people of the world that they're worthy of having the competition. It's a great deal to them. In fact, it means the earth to them that they've been given the World Cup. The first to obviously be held in the Middle East, and they're going to carry that legacy for years to come. Once the World Cup has come and gone, there's going to be these amazing facilities for all the local people to use, and that's what the legacy will be, is that the stadiums will then be made smaller, they'll be reduced in size, and they become almost like community centres. And what they're doing and what their vision is for the future is to me, it should be applauded. And there's going to be a fantastic model here for hopefully other countries to look at and to follow. Yes, it's hot here. Of course, it's hot here. But what people have got to understand is that the World Cup is not going to be played in the summer. It's going to be played in the winter. And you have to trust me when I tell you that the temperatures in the winter are lush. It's like an Indian summer here in the winter. We sit out on the balcony most nights and have dinner or a glass of wine, and we have to sit there with jumpers and cardigans on because it actually gets quite cold in the evenings. In the middle of the night, the temperatures drop quite dramatically. When I take the dog out in the morning, it's freezing. I've got to put a jacket on. So people have got to stop worrying about the heat. It's an absolute nonsense. Because the World Cup will not be played in the summer. So the temperature thing can be cast to one side, can be forgotten about. So yeah, it's going to be incredible. It really will. And, I just hope that people will start to jump on board and fully appreciate that the people here and the government here and the people of Qatar are working really, really hard to show the people of the world that they are worthy of having the competition. And I wish them nothing but success and luck with it. So yeah, that's my personal opinion on it.
Yeah, fair point, fair point. And just sort of switching back to your job sort of within beIN Sports and obviously having worked for ESPN, I noticed doing my research obviously that you touched on earlier on, you've interviewed people like Sir Alex, Roy Keane. I saw.
Yeah.
Can you sort of touch on anyone that you sort of sat in front of and just thought, wow, this person is really, really interesting, or anyone you particularly enjoyed interviewing more than anyone else?
Oh, good question. So Alex Ferguson, for me, he's just fascinating. He's just such a fascinating man. And I'm extremely fortunate because he wrote the foreword for my book. The connection with my family goes back years and years because my late grandfather was a very well-known and respected football journalist in Scotland. And it was he that actually set Sir Alex on his way into management because the chairman of St Mirren at the time was a guy called Mr. Todd. And he was very close with my grandfather and called him one day and said to him, look, I need your advice on a young upcoming manager. I want to change the managers. Who would you advise? And my grandfather said to him immediately, try Alex Ferguson at East Stirlingshire. And Sir Alex knows this story. And when I first joined MUTV, he recognised the name Begg and came over and asked me if I was John Begg's son. And I said to him, no, I'm his grandson. And then I told him the story. And ever since then, he's just been incredible with me. He's been almost like a father to me. So I've been very, very fortunate from that point of view. He's always guided me, and he wrote to me when I was at Celtic. He wrote to me when I was in Singapore. And it was when I lost my job, and it was just he's just an incredible human being. So to sit down in his presence and interview him, he makes you step up to the plate. Now, I mean that with the greatest respect to everyone else that I've interviewed, because you should be at your absolute best when you interview everybody. But there's something about Sir Alex that just makes you just want to do that little bit more and that little bit better. And you always know when you've nailed it, he'll say two words to you. He'll go, well done. So you always know you've done a really good interview with him if he says at the end, well done. And it happened 3 times out of the 4 times that I interviewed him. And, you just go home really, really happy because you've kept the gaffer happy that day. Gordon Strachan is fascinating to interview because he's just such an articulated, intelligent man who just knows football inside out. And you have to be very careful with Gordon not to insult his intelligence. And that's why I always used to sit down with him on a Friday morning when I was at Celtic before our interview and go through the questions that I wanted to ask him. I would sit down and say to him, look, this is the theme of why I'm asking you these questions, and here's my thinking of behind this question. And invariably, he would answer all of them. I think in the 3 years that I was with 2 years, sorry, that I was with Gordon. He only refused to answer one question in that whole time. Roy Keane is hard. He's prickly. He's not one for making small conversation. I always used to try and make the people that I was interviewing as relaxed as possible, so that they would open up. So that it's like, for them, they're just chatting with a mate. And even though I'm there to do a job, I wanted them to be as comfortable as they possibly could be, so that you get the best out of them. So I used to always chat on with guys and, just try and make them feel comfortable and make them understand that I had no agenda. I'm not looking for controversy. I'm just trying to get the best interview that I possibly can for MUTV, Celtic TV, ESPN, whoever it was I was working for. So Roy was very difficult. Didn't overly enjoy his company, to be honest. Who else have I interviewed? God, David Beckham. Just one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Just a very humble guy. I think his upbringing has left that humbleness in him. Just a really, really nice chap, and just really interesting to talk to about his, because his level of fame when I spoke to him was just, it skyrocketed. And it's just, I find it quite interesting sitting down, having some sort of adulation myself, obviously when I was in the boy band, but his level of adulation is on a completely different level. So it was really interesting talking to him about how he handles fame and how he handles the fans. And, at the end of the day, he's like, I'm just a football player, I'm just a football player, and the rest of it just comes. It's just a job. So I thoroughly enjoyed sitting down with David to chat with him. We've got guys that come over now to beIN Sports, and I just thoroughly enjoy their company. Graham Souness, really interesting guy. Alan Shearer's really good fun. Michelle Salgado's always got a story or two. It's just, I'm in such a privileged position, and as I've got older, it's made me appreciate my position more, and I'm just lapping it up at the moment and trying to enjoy it as much as I can.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people sat there going, "Oh, those people! I wish I could meet any of those." It's
Yeah.
it is interesting, and just I'll have to ask you as well. You mentioned Sir Alex there with regards to Scottish managers. We were chatting briefly before we went on air, and you were saying that you know Derek Adams, who a lot of people
Yeah.
may not be familiar with, but he's the current manager of Plymouth Argyle down where I am.
Yeah.
There's always been a history, particularly in England, of Scottish managers coming down and being fantastically successful. Is there something in the formula, do you think? Is it just the way that Scottish managers treat the game? Is it the love for the game, or is it just a red herring and it's just sort of an overrated point?
I don't know. It's a good question. I've never really thought about it, to be honest. I just think, when you go back in time, most of the successful managers have all been Scottish. Jock Stein, Sir Alex, Bill Shankly, George Graham, I suppose. Souness was obviously very successful at Rangers. I don't know. I think man management is very important. Whenever I speak to the guys here who have been in managerial positions, it's all about the man management, and it's how they treat the players, and how to get the best out of players. And I think obviously Sir Alex was the absolute greatest at that. I also think people surround themselves with coaching staff who actually do the day-to-day coaching, but the manager is there to manage the team, to manage the boys, and obviously he makes the final decision on the team that's going to be picked. I don't know, maybe it's in the water. I don't really know. Derek's such a fascinating character. I've known Derek since we were 9 years old. We play, my first ever boys club. Derek and I were teammates because his father is a guy called George Adams, who's a very well-known youth mogul in Scotland, and he changed youth football as we know it. Worked at Aberdeen. He was my youth team coach when I was at Aberdeen, and he was at Rangers, he was at Celtic, and he was director of football at Ross County when Derek was the manager there. They have an aura for me about them. Derek's just a genuinely really, really nice guy, and he treats people how he expects to be treated. And I think it just helps. Derek never swears. It's one thing I absolutely love about Derek and George. They never swear. When I was training with the pick of the schoolboys from the Aberdeen area back in my teenage years, George's favourite term was "you big bandit." Ali, you big bandit. That's all he would ever call me. And from what I understand, Derek has taken that into his managerial career as well. He just goes around calling people bandits, to change the swear word. And I can't imagine what it must be like for the boys in the dressing room, whether they find it hilariously funny or whether they actually respect him for not shouting and screaming and swearing. I really don't know, because Derek's always in trouble. He's always in trouble with the FA, and referees and assistant referees and the fourth official, because he's got such a temper on him, but he never swears. It's just hilarious. And I spoke to him this morning, and I just said to him, like, do me a favour. And I know you've experienced the Scottish Cup final, but you're going to Wembley. It's one of the most iconic stadiums in the world. Just take it all in. Yeah, obviously I know you're there to do a job, and you desperately want your team to get through and to win the playoff, and I understand that. But just do me a favour, just take it all in, so that when you get older and you have your kids and your grandkids, you can tell them the stories about it. Because for me, that's what's important. I can sit here and tell you my story, and I'm delighted to be able to do it. And I'm in a privileged position to be able to tell you my story. And I just said to him, just take it in, just remember it. Yeah, don't let the day pass you by. I made that mistake when I was in the band, and we did Top of the Pops, and I let the day pass me by, and I've hardly got any recollection of it, and I regret that. I've done Top of the Pops, for Christ's sake. How many people can say that? And I just let the day pass me by, and I'm an idiot for allowing myself to do that. And I was arrogant enough for allowing myself to do that as a 21-year-old boy, whereas now, I'm older and wiser and able to take these things in. So I just said to him, just take it in, fella, So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak for, well, certainly the town or the city of Plymouth, I should say. But there's a lot of the Green Army going up to Wembley. I know that. I think it's
Yeah,
about 28 odd
brilliant.
thousand. Something.
Yeah,
It's
fantastic.
going to be
Fantastic.
quite the day. I think it's fair to say.
Mm.
Final question then. We have to ask this
Mm.
to all of our guests on this show, because we like to get a feel for the hipster element of things. So we ask you to name your favourite hipster player, of all time, past and present. So if you've got one
Okay.
currently and one of previous, and a little bit about why you've chosen them.
Okay, so my favourite all-time player is Willie Miller, Aberdeen's former captain, just because, for me, he's the greatest defender that's ever lived. Just a phenomenal talent, a great leader, a wonderful human being who I'm now in an extremely lucky position to call a friend. When he asked me to write the chapter for his book, it was before my children were born. It was the greatest moment of my life. And when he offered his services to help me launch my book in Aberdeen, it was just the most incredible day. So Willie Miller, for just being Willie Miller. Favorite player at the moment? That's a really tough call.
Always
Gee,
gets
me.
everyone, this one. Always gets everyone.
Yeah. God, I could go with this, like, your Messis and your Ronaldos, but I kind of went off Ronaldo after seeing his movie. Um, eh, oh, I've got to go with, yeah, I've got to go with Messi, because
Yeah,
he's just a phenomenal talent, isn't he?
he is.
He's just incredible, and he never ceases to amaze me. He just does things with a football that I just think, hey, fella, how'd you do that? Is that just natural? Did you practice that? Or does it just come natural? How'd you do it? He's just incredible, isn't he? And I don't know if we'll ever see his likes again. God, I hope we do, but I'm not sure if we will.
No, I struggle to imagine how he will. I tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a bonus question just because we've got the Euros coming up. Give us one player in that Austrian side that you
Yeah.
think everyone should keep an eye on.
Oh, Alaba. I know it might be an obvious choice, but Alaba, just what a lad! I love him. He came up through this the system that the FA devised with the government and the sports ministry, where they give kids an opportunity to go away to camps and to learn the trade and fitness and education, and he came through this system, and I just think he's a fantastic football player as well, and for me he's almost the face of Austrian football. So yeah, just keep an eye on the big man. He's just such a good talent, isn't he?
Yeah, he's, again, I can hear Tom screaming away to himself. He absolutely adores David Alaba. So,
Yeah, and
so
I hope the big man up front, Mark Yanko. I, I hope, I'm not sure if he'll start, but I hope he does, because he's just again, he's kind of getting to the twilight of his career, and I just hope he goes out on a high. I really do. But yeah, just keep your eye on Alaba. Eh?
yeah, I think there'll be a lot of people doing the same.
Mm.
Before we wrap up, then I'll just give you an opportunity once again, just to remind people of your book, where they can
Mm.
buy it, and anything else that you've got coming up that you might want to let everyone know about.
Okay, well, you can get my book on Amazon. You just got to type in Beg to Differ. So Beg as in my surname, Begg. So it's on Amazon. You can get it through my publisher as well. They are called Ruddling House. And Karen's got her own website, and she's on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. Or quite simply, if people want to get in touch with me, just follow me on Twitter, and I'll follow you back, and I'll get you a copy over through my publisher and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, just that's the way to do it, really.
Superb, lovely job. And I'm pretty sure, I think I speak for anyone listening to this, we would be delighted to have you back at some point.
Brilliant,
And
thank you.
I know Tom will absolutely kill me if I don't get him on with you. So I'm sure that will happen. And now I just want to take this opportunity to thank you ever so much for joining us. And
It's an absolute pleasure.
it's really
Thank you
been
for having me on.
anytime. I say we'll definitely have you back, and we will of course remind people of your book with the links as well. So
Thank you very much.
Ali, thank you for your time. And
Pleasure.
as with always, we say to all of our on the end of our podcast, keep your beard strong and your glasses trendy. We've been the Football Hipsters, and we'll speak to you very soon.
Cheers.